Man, I wouldn't want to live in Angel Grove when Rita can look through pretty much anything. Hey guys, and welcome to another Ranger Rant. I'm Archer9234. Today I'll be discussing episode 14 from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1, titled Green with Evil Part 1. Now this episode's adapted from episode 17 of Kyoryu Sentai Zyurangers. Now this is also the first time in Super Sentai history that a sixth hero was actually introduced into the franchise. Now there were previous other incarnations of the sixth hero, prominently known as X1 Mask from Mask Man. He counted as the precursor to the sixth hero. He really wasn't. He was only as a temporary ranger in one episode only. Now this is a perfect timing for American adaptations of the franchise because from this point on, we always had a sixth hero in the franchise, more or less. Now the episode starts off with the usual MMPR previews. Now in the early days of PR, we usually had the previews before the episode actually starting, which basically gave a little bit of extra backstory to what's going to happen to the episode and any introductions to either new monsters or new characters. But if you saw this episode during the re-airing on Jetix TV, unfortunately the previews were cut during those broadcasts. So the episode starts off inside the juice bar and it's basically set up as, a martial arts tournament, and we're getting introduced to other combatants. And we're seeing people who practice fighting and also doing their training, and of course we finally get the introduction for the very first time, Tommy, as soon will be the Green Ranger in the season. Of course, Jason and everyone are like, well, who's this guy? This guy's brand new. And everyone's like, oh, he transferred in from another place. And this is the first time we see that Kimberly is like saying he's kind of cute. And of course, Rita Repulsa is, as usual, spying on the Rangers and seeing what they're doing. This is the thing I always felt weird about Rita Repulsa. Basically, Rita could simply follow the Rangers anywhere they want. To me, it would always feel weird that someone is always spying on me because frankly, she could spy on the Rangers while they're in their bathroom, for God's sakes. And of course, while the Rangers are seeing this new guy, Rita also sees the new guy in town and is saying that he would be perfect for being my evil Green Ranger. And of course, Squad Babu and Golda are like, yes, this is a perfect plan. This is a good way to destroy the Rangers. And basically one of their own would actually go and kill them. Now, of course, Jason is in the tournament and of course is now finally fighting Tommy. And we're basically giving an introduction that Tommy is a competent fighter. And it's also very unique this episode because we get introduced to, pretty much traditional martial arts tournaments. We do see the basic rules and how they enter a fight, bow, and all this other extra stuff. Now, another good thing about doing the martial arts tournament is that since all the actors are proficient acrobatics, martial arts themselves, they can film the entire scene with the principal actors instead of, cutting toward, a stunt double. Now, of course, since this is the first season of MMPR, these episodes also suffer from the reversioning of MMPR where they added new special effects. Now, a few things were changed during the reversioning. The main things is that they added Japanese writing and some special effects during several shots of the Jason versus Tommy fight. Mainly whenever they did like punches and kicks, they would do this weird flashing and they have Japanese text on the screen. There were two main reasons why they did this. One is it to be cool for the reversioning, I guess. And two, it is to censor certain things. Now, for whatever reason, Disney censored a lot of scenes in the first season of MMPR when they did the reversioning. The show was too graphic for today's kids, even though that doesn't really make any sense. It's perfectly fine back in '93, but it's not fine in 2009. I also like to point out some of the Japanese writing was incorrectly spelled. So of course Jason and Tommy are evenly matched. Of course at the end of the fight, everything just ends in a draw. So obviously Jason didn't win and Tommy didn't win. And of course everyone's congratulating each other, you've done well, and of course Jason walks off. Now of course Jason is exhausted from the fight and of course heads back home in order to freshen up. And he says, I'll meet you guys at the juice bar. Now the thing that really doesn't make any sense is that the martial arts tournament took place in the juice bar. So either it was a writing mistake where they shouldn't have said that, or the martial arts tournament was supposed to be in another location, but again, since season 1 had really no budget, they simply converted the juice bar. But the thing that was stupid though is that the moment Jason says, I'm gonna meet you guys in the juice bar, the camera pans right in front of the juice bar logo that's right behind Jason, which made the scene even more stupid. So we basically head back to Rita Repulsa and we basically see her preparing in order to convert Tommy into the evil Green Ranger. She's creating spells and using her infamous evil skull and is charging up her magical powers. Of course, we head back to Angel Grove High, and we see that Kimberly is at her locker. And of course, Bulk and Skull is trying to bother her all the time, and they're being very annoying to her. When we finally get an introduction to Tommy. Now, of course, Bulk and Skull don't know who he is, so of course they have to say, "Oh, you're the new transfer student." And of course, Tommy is basically saying, "You should leave her alone." As usual, being the bullies they are. Now, this is the very first time we get the infamous moment of Tommy's key-eyeing sound effects. Now, I particularly never liked this aspect of Tommy's character. I mean, all the Rangers always had their special key-eyeing sound effects they did, but Tommy's, for the most part, are the most annoying because he basically overdoes it. So while Tommy is showing off his martial arts skill, Bulk and Skull are like totally scared and simply walk off and get away from him while, of course, Tommy finally introduces himself. Now, of course, Kimberly actually likes him, so she's trying to, like, well, we should meet up at the juice bar later on. And of course, Tommy simply agrees. And so we finally get their first beginnings of their love interest between the two each other. So once Tommy leaves school, we find out that Rita has been tracking him all this time and is basically saying, well, I need to test him to see if he's worthy of the Green Ranger powers. And of course, Tommy's totally ambushed by putties inside an alleyway. And of course, Tommy fights off the putties. Now, of course, this scene is infamous too. During the fight, Tommy actually uses a trash can lid to fight off the putties, which is very reminiscent to Captain America. He fights in a similar fashion, using the trash can lid as a shield, and actually even throws it at the putty patrollers. I'm not exactly sure if they did this on purpose, because a couple of years prior to MMPR, they did make a Captain America movie in the early 90s. I wouldn't be surprised if they were just joking on that. Now, of course, since Tommy easily defeated the putty patrollers, now Rita Repulsa basically says, "You are worthy of the Green Ranger powers," teleporting Tommy into Rita's castle, and we finally see her use her magic and convert him to an evil Green Ranger. Now, there's a couple of things that were totally weird during this moment. Now, when Tommy gets teleported to Rita's castle, all of a sudden he's inside a cocoon and then rises up, which doesn't really make any sense. Why would Rita just do that all of a sudden for no apparent reason? The reason why this happened was because they switched over to the Japanese footage. Now, there's several differences between the original Japanese story and the American adaptation of the story. Now, first of all, in Jew Rangers, the Green Ranger is actually the brother of the Red Ranger. The reason why he was inside this webbing was because he was entombed much more longer than the other 5 members, because mainly no one knew he was actually entombed just like the other 5. Bandora actually knew where he was, and so she used her black magic to awaken him. He looked totally different too. He had black hair, totally different kind of complexion. That's the reason, because that was Burai and not Tommy. And he finally gets handed the green power coin, which finally transforms him into the evil Green Ranger. Now let's talk about the shield. Now, of course, everyone notices that there's a big difference between the Japanese shield and the American shield. While the Japanese one is much more stiffer, much more streamlined, and more believable, while the American suit looks really crappy. It's really wrinkly, the shield is twice as big, and it looks like paper mache. Now, there's one big reason why this happened. Thanks to an interview with Jason David Frank at a con, he basically said the reason why this happened was because they did actually make a similar shield to the Japanese version of it, but the problem was the stunt actor and JDF couldn't act in the suit, so he said, you gotta make it bigger, you gotta make it easier for us to move around it. So unfortunately, they made a bigger shield, but it looked much more crappier, but it was easier for them to move in. So of course, since now Rita has her evil Green Ranger, she sends him off to the command center. Unfortunately, at the exact same time when Tommy's heading toward the command center, we see that Alpha needs to go into a recharge cycle, which is really poor timing. Now, I do like that they remember a specific rule back in the original pilot episode, Day of the Dumpster, is that only a person with a power coin can enter the command center. So when Tommy teleports into the command center finally, we see that Alpha's in his recharge mode, and of course, we see that the command center is totally defenseless at this moment. And when we find out also is that Zordon actually knew about the Green Ranger powers at this point. So obviously Zordon's been keeping secrets from the other Rangers. I do like to point out a continuity issue is that if you look at the Green Ranger suit during the scene, you'll notice that the power coin is actually missing from his power morpher. Now, obviously, people would say, well, it should not be in there because, again, Tommy shows that he has the 6th power coin to Zordon. But the problem is that he should have put it, it should have been in there in the beginning. He should have taken it out, showed it to Zordon, and then put it back in. The problem is that the power coin disappears for most of the scene, and it's not inside the morpher. Now, unfortunately, since Alpha was inside his recharge mode, powered up too late, and of course Tommy was totally prepared for this, and Tommy unfortunately gave Alpha a virus, and of course Tommy unfortunately actually started ripping apart the control panels in the command center. Now this causes devastating problems. Now, the technology in the command center keeps Zordon tethered to this dimension so he can communicate with the Rangers. When Tommy destroyed all the control panels, Zordon was basically untethered to our dimension and was simply basically thrown around, and they lost their signal to Zordon. I also like to say that this footage was actually reused later on during season 2. Now, after the commercial break, we see that Tommy finally teleports out of the command center, fulfilling his first mission as the evil Green Ranger. Now, this is the actual only moment where we actually do see his power coin inside his power morpher. Of course, we finally head back to the Rangers and we see them cleaning the rad bug when the girls arrive and basically explain that, well, I was supposed to meet him at the juice bar and he never showed up. So of course everyone like, well, maybe he had something to do. When unfortunately Alpha finally contacted him on the communicator, the communicators were totally screwed. They couldn't teleport to the command center, so they had to hop into the rad bug. Now I always wondered, what would the Rangers have done if they didn't have the rad bug? If they didn't have the rad bug, they would have had to simply walk to the command center, and that would have probably taken days. So while the Rangers are heading toward the command center in the rad bug, we see that Rita is setting up her second plan, and we basically see that she's going to use Goldar and simply sends him to Earth and makes him grow and to start to attack in order to lure the Rangers out. So when the Rangers finally arrive at the command center and everything's totally destroyed, all the consoles have been ripped apart, Alpha unfortunately has a virus in him and is totally disabled, and Billy has to try to figure out what's going on. I do like to point out, though, is that once the Rangers exit the rad bug disappears totally from the command center. So, of course, Billy is trying to figure out what happened, what's going on, and everyone notices that Zordon is not in his energy tube. Fortunately enough, Billy figures out, well, the virus is on the CD. He pulls it out, and Alpha regains some functionality to the Rangers. Conveniently enough, Alpha's memory has been wiped, and he doesn't remember what happened, who invaded the command center, and of course everyone's saying no one can enter the command center without a power coin, which obviously that everyone should have thought is that someone has a new power coin, and then there must be a new Ranger out there. And of course the only person who has the answers is Zordon. Unfortunately, while the Rangers are trying to regroup and figure out what's going on, we see that Goldar is attacking the city. The Rangers basically have to get out there and fight Goldar. So the Rangers finally morph and they head out basically to fight some putties, and we see that the Green Ranger is waiting. So of course the Rangers defeat the putties with ease and of course call out for the Megazord and eventually fight off Goldar. Unfortunately, this was the plan all along, is to lure the Rangers out, and of course we see that the Green Ranger invades the Megazord. Since again he has a power coin, he has access to the Megazord and simply enters the cockpit and actually destroys the cockpit and throws all the Rangers out of the Megazord, and they begin the fight on ground level. So unfortunately, while the Rangers are fighting the Green Ranger, they don't know his abilities. They don't know that he's stronger than them because he has a special shield that it gives him improved defenses. He has other abilities where he can shoot off energy beams and pretty much overpowers all 5 Rangers. Now, I do like to point out one thing. Tommy doesn't actually have his Dragon Dagger during the first part. Now, the same thing happened in Green Rangers as well. He didn't have access to the Dragon Dagger at this point in time. That's the reason why we see him fighting with energy powers, and he steals one of the Blade Blasters from the Rangers. Unfortunately, though, the Rangers are totally overpowered by the Green Ranger, and unfortunately, the Rangers have to retreat the scene and return to the command center. When the Rangers finally return to the command center, they basically don't know who the Green Ranger is. How can they get Zordon back? And unfortunately, we see that Alpha is still being affected by the virus and simply shuts down. Again, the Rangers are new to this. They don't really know what to do, and this is the very first time where they have to think on their own and try to devise a plan in order to combat Rita and the new evil Green Ranger. So overall, I have to give this episode a 4 out of 5. I mean, it was a really good episode because before the Green with Evil arc, we had the Monster of the Week episodes, and we always see the Rangers were perfect. They overcome some obstacles, but we never really had a big major threat. Another major aspect of this is because it's one of them. It's a Ranger of them that have the exact same abilities, same powers as them, and he can basically invade the command center and actually took Zordon, their mentor, away from them, and they're just totally defenseless. Now, I also like to point out that since this was the first time in Super Sentai we got the 6th hero, it wasn't a really big of a deal because at this point in time, they were just starting to establish 6th hero. They treated him basically as an extra, not really much as a focus point. He was just in for very few episodes, completely opposite to how Tommy was using him in PR. When Tommy arrived in the first season, his popularity exploded. Kids and fans loved the character so much, and to the point where it forced Saban to bring him back for the remainder of the series. Basically, if you watch Zyurangers, the 6th Ranger was just there for a little while, and Burai unfortunately dies, and his powers are transferred to Geki. But once Dawn Ranger started, the 6th Ranger was more involved in the storyline. I wouldn't be surprised that his popularity in America convinced Toei to keep this aspect of the franchise going for all these years. Now, the reason why I don't give it a perfect score is because the episode felt rushed, mainly because we we get an introduction to Tommy and the Green Ranger. The problem is we don't really know anything about Tommy. We really didn't know anything else. We didn't know where he came from. We didn't know his family members, nothing. He just basically came into the story as a plot device. I really wish they gave Tommy a little bit more backstory in the first episode, why he left his old town and why he came over here. What do you guys personally think? Do you think this episode was amazing because, again, it introduces Tommy, the de facto god of Power Rangers, the most famous Ranger of all time? Or do you think it was like, I don't want an evil Green Ranger, I want all the Rangers to be good? What do you guys personally think? Again, leave your comments below on what you think on this episode, and of course, leave your comments below on what future episodes you would like me to review. For next week's episode, I'll be continuing the review with Green with Evil Part 2. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys right back here next week.